Order in the court. What it do, y'all? It's your brother man from the motherland coming to you guys live from the NY, back with another installment of that Samba Conversation. For those that don't know who I am him, the Honorable Junes, the NBIC. Giving all praise and glory to the heavenlies, for they are worthy to be what? To be praised. Last but not least, want to give a shout out to all you guys for your continuous support, leaving all your feedback, the positive, the negative, all things is respected and needed, because it allows me to do what I do best, and that is to keep my foot on the what, people? Oh no, we switching it up. Keep my foot on you Christianities, your Islams, Judaism, Hebrewism, Hinduism, and we're gonna keep bursting these bubbles until there's no more, until it's eradicated from the earth. Round of applause for that. Before I even start, let me send my heartfelt condolences to my big bro. I lost a brother of mine. We grew up together. You know, so much to say, but he passed away on Monday, man. And you know, I'm finding this out today, and you know, I just want to send my condolences sincerely, though. You know what I'm saying? All jokes aside, send my condolences. That was really my brother. We grew up with each other. You know what I'm saying? Like, living in the same house. He lived up top from me. And just to see how he left this earth, definitely wasn't the way, you know, we all intended. You know what I'm saying? You know, I'll be present. They're having a candle ceremony, and I'll be present there. And yeah. You know, send my condolences, and of course, you know, gotta prepare myself to attend this funeral as well. You know what I'm saying? Like, this was really a brother of mine. You know what I'm saying? It was not like a homie. It's literally like my brother, like my brother, right? And you know, I say that to say this, man. But those that got brothers and sisters, man, you know, I don't care what the circumstances is. I don't care what you guys is going through, man. Don't let something like this happen when you unable to say goodbye, when you unable to have conversations and bury hatchets and just be at good odds with each other. You know what I'm saying? Don't let it get there. You know what I'm saying? And yeah, we'll just leave it as that. But on today's Samba Conversation, man, we're gonna have a phenomenal one, man. And I gotta pose a question to you guys, man. Who wrote the Hebrew Bible? Now, I put this up on my social media, and of course somebody says the Hebrew Bible was written by Hebrew men. Of course, come on now. But for the average person, you guys need to know who really wrote the Hebrew Bible. And shout out to this brother named Joel. Matter of fact, I'm not even gonna say nothing. I'll let him introduce himself, okay? But this is gonna be a phenomenal Samba Conversation. And you know, when it's all said and done, we will continue this conversation. But again, the question is, who wrote the Hebrew Bible? Let us dive in.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you all for being here. Can everyone hear me? Carol, all the way in the back? Okay, I'll talk quieter then. A special thank you, obviously, to Andrew and to Jackson for inviting me here. Before I jump in, let me say just a little bit about me, very little, since some of it was just covered. The most important thing, I suppose, is I am a Jewish professor at a Christian divinity school. And I have been for almost 20 years at the school. I've been Jewish longer than that. That's kind of a wild thing to do and to be, but it certainly has given me a lot of opportunity to think about what I think we're doing with the Bible. I teach a community at Yale that is pretty diverse, aside from everyone being Christian, so not maybe too
As you can see, he's telling you that he teaches at Yale. So this is a well-renowned, well-respected. Of course, he's Jewish as well. So the card is in his favor at this particular moment. I just want to throw that out there. So for those that want to, come up with their heckling and give their own perception and opinions because it's not facts, this man is in the field. So shout out to him for these accolades he achieved, but let him continue telling who he is.
This space. Yale's not a seminary where we're teaching the students what to think or believe. I have a classroom full of Episcopalians and Catholics and Lutherans and Presbyterians and evangelicals and so many ex-evangelicals. There would be no way for me to say something about what they should all commonly think or believe, even if I were inclined to do so, which, as a Jew, I'm really not. So what I teach is a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today, which is the
fair use, YouTube. Fair use. This is for educational purposes. Fair use. Let us continue.
History of the text, which we all share, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. And rather than what to think about the Bible, how to think about it. I think, to be quite honest, that I have the greatest job in the world, and I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit of it with you. So my task today, much appreciated, was to speak about creating the Hebrew Bible. And at least I wasn't given a particularly broad topic. How to go about that kept me up at night a little bit. The various parts of the Hebrew Bible all have different literary histories. The Pentateuch, the first 5 books, are different in their literary history from the books of Joshua through Kings. The prophets have their own histories, each of them distinct from the others. Psalms are different still, and Proverbs and Chronicles.
Just an FYI, what he's trying to let you know is he's basically going to break down the entire Old Testament. Just an FYI. Okay? Stay tuned.
Not that anyone has ever cared about Chronicles. I mean, I have spent my entire career, basically, working just on literary history of the Pentateuch. I could give you a 10-lecture series on the Pentateuch alone and still not cover it all. We'll talk about that later.
The Pentateuch is the first 5 books of Moses, just to let you guys know, if you was wondering.
So while I'm going to touch on all of these various texts over the course of the next however long I end up speaking, 4 or 5 hours, we're all good for that, right? Okay. This is going to be something of a bird's eye view of how the Hebrew Bible came to be, and of course I'll spend some time talking about why I think it matters in the end. Before we get into how the Hebrew Bible came to be, I'd like to take a moment to think about what the Hebrew Bible actually is. And I don't mean sort of like conceptually what is the Bible to us, but like literally. When you pick up your Bible here at Watch Hill, and they are sitting in the pews in front of you, don't.
This is for all you Bible readers. This is for all you Israelites. This is for all those that's, calling on the Creator's name and mixing it with European philosophies. This is for you. This is for y'all. This is the food that y'all been waiting for, and I got it for you. Let us continue.
Pick it up now. When you turn to the first part of it, that is the Old Testament Hebrew Bible, what are you actually looking at? Well, in your Bibles, I'm fairly certain you will see the book of Ruth coming after the book of Judges. I'm pretty sure that you would find that just before you get to the New Testament, you're reading all the prophets. And that means that you're not reading the Hebrew Bible. that means you're reading the Old Testament. And you might think, well, what's the difference? They are basically the same books, though they are in a different order, arranged in the New Testament to lead prophetically into, in your Bibles, rather. The Old Testament is arranged to lead into the New Testament, right? So the prophets come at the end as prophecies of what is about to come, which is not the case for the Hebrew Bible or the Jewish Bible, in which the prophets are smack in the middle, and we end with Chronicles. In short, the Old Testament is a Christian book and it goes before the New Testament. The Hebrew Bible is a Jewish book, and it goes before nothing. More accurately, maybe even, the Hebrew Bible is a collection of ancient Israelite literary works. And that's the context, ancient Israel, in which, and importantly for which, these texts were created. Even beyond the Old Testament / Hebrew Bible nomenclature issue, what is it that you're actually reading? Unless you are an Orthodox Jew, I think I'm in the clear, you have always encountered the Bible in translation. Whether it's English or whatever your vernacular language of choice happens to be.
Did you just hear what he said, people? Everything that you have read has been in a translation, which means that there's no telling what are we reading, what are we connecting to, who are we calling on? Because if we don't know where it's being translated from and who's doing the translation, and 9 out of 10 times, 10 out of 10 times, the translators are people of color, just so you know. Just so you know. And all of the scrolls not true. Just letting you know. Let us continue.
Maybe in Latin, if there's some old school Catholics out there. And while you were reading your Bible, you probably thought, hey, I'm reading the Bible. But you were reading a translation. And all translations are interpretations. They all involve choices that are largely invisible to the reader.
He said choices. Listen carefully to what he's saying. He said choices, people. Pay attention to these wordings that he says. He's going to drop a lot of gems for you guys. Listen carefully.
What were those translators actually translating? Every modern translation of the Hebrew Bible is based on a single manuscript. It is the oldest complete text of the Hebrew Bible that we have in the world, and it is from the 11th century CE. So not BCE, like the recent 11th century, like less than 1,000 years ago. Or, to put it another way, around 2,000 years after the earliest biblical texts were probably composed. So your Bible, your text that your Bible is based on, the Hebrew that your translation is based on, is from the 11th century, 2,000 years after some of the biblical texts were written. And the question is, what do we think the chances are that that text remained perfectly stable for those 2,000 years between it first being written and our manuscript? Again, the best biblical text we have is from the Middle Ages. We have really very little way of accessing what the original authors of these texts might have wanted us to read. Another layer of difficulty, that one manuscript that all of our modern translations are based on, like every manuscript out there, has typos. Right? I mean, you imagine having to hand copy the entirety of the Bible. It's a mistake here and there. Many modern translations are aware of these mistakes. We compare that manuscript to other ones, and we figure out where something's gone wrong, perhaps. So modern translations often are aware of these and will correct these errors, often without letting you know that they're doing so. Other translations, like the King James, famously, doesn't fix those errors. So for some readers, what we know as scholars are essentially typos, are part of the Bible. And I don't want to get ahead of the rest of the lecture series, but on top of that issue, there's the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are way older, right? 2nd century BCE in some cases, so way older than our like best manuscript of the text. The problem is there are a lot of places where the Dead Sea Scrolls version of the Bible differs from our version of the Bible. But that one's older. You'd think maybe it should get more credit than the one from 1,000 years later. And then there's the Septuagint, which is the name we give the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, which is from the 3rd century BCE, probably. But it turns out that the Greek translation, this very old Greek translation, isn't even translating the same text that we have as our Hebrew Bible today. For example, in the Greek version of the Bible, the book of Jeremiah is a 1/6 shorter than it is in the Bible in front of you in the pews. I hope nobody's faith was like deeply based on that 1/6 of Jeremiah. Point, if it's not clear yet, is that there really is no the Hebrew Bible. Our English Bibles are modern translations of a single 11th century medieval manuscript with its typos 2,000 years after the biblical texts began to be set down, with no recognition really at all that there are older versions of the text out there that have better claims to antiquity.
Are you dumb? Are you dumb?
Yeah. And I will be dropping this. Anytime when he drops a message, I'll probably do this.
Are you dumb?
Or you guys will see this. Okay? I'm not gonna show my face. I'm gonna let it play out so you guys can hear this and watch it in its whole totality. As you can see, put together in the medieval stages. This is around like prior to the King James being put together or even having a conversation to be put together. I want you guys to listen to this man. Let us continue.
Are often starkly different. If that's not enough to shake your confidence in the Hebrew Bible, let's talk about what's in it and where all that stuff comes from. Oh well. Fine. The Hebrew Bible, of course, is not really a book, even though it is bound between two covers. It's more accurately a library. It's a collection of writings from ancient Israel, spanning nearly a millennium of that community's existence. It consists largely of attempts to understand and define Israel's relationship with its God. Largely, but not entirely. There's love poetry in there, in Song of Songs. There's the Book of Esther, in which the deity makes not a single appearance. I'm going to talk later on about how the whole thing came together. But for now, I only want to point out that the literary works that are collected in this library are maybe a little bit more haphazard than is commonly thought. To put it another way, not a single book in the Bible was written to be a book in the Bible.
Are you dumb? Are you dumb?
Now, did you guys just hear that? Did you guys just hear that? I hope you guys are paying attention to what he's saying. Now, again, this is a top researcher, top historian when it comes to Bibles. He works at Yale. You don't get those prestige jobs and positions without you knowing and showing your works. And as you heard him say in the beginning, he's been doing this his entire majority of his life. And he's a young man, by the way. Let us continue.
They may have ended up there, but they didn't have to. And other works that were written in the same places and times, indeed, didn't end up in there. This is due more to historical accident than to anything intentional, some overarching plan. These books happen to be the ones that are in this library, in this collection. More on that in a bit. This library of the Hebrew Bible is highly varied. There are stories, shorter and longer. There are laws, There's prophecy, there are poems and proverbs and genealogies and lists. There's doom and destruction, there's hope and even humor. The Hebrew Bible represents the vast majority of the existing literature from ancient Israel. So I guess it's a nice thing that it covers so many genres and styles. This is, of course, in contrast to the New Testament, which is like a tiny little sliver of the entirety of Greco-Roman literature. So they've got all of this wonderful stuff to compare their texts with, and this is what we got from ancient Israel. My point, again, is that these ancient Israelites weren't writing the Bible. Right? They were writing literature in their own vernacular, in their native literary genres. Okay, that's enough of generalities, and now I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty, as I'm sure you're all sitting there thinking, why doesn't he just get to the good stuff? And fine, if you're going to be pushy about it, I will. The oldest texts preserved in our Hebrew Bible, the very oldest, probably date from the 11th or 10th century BCE. So having said that, that's a long time ago, having said that, let me start with this observation. Even if the Hebrew Bible is old, it is not the oldest, nor is it particularly unique. It draws on and imitates, sometimes even almost plagiarizes, ancient Near Eastern literature that predates it sometimes by more than a millennium. Everyone's favorite creation story in Genesis 1, in the beginning, etc., is a clear variant of a Mesopotamian creation myth from the second millennium BCE. The story of Moses' birth, right, the basket and the reeds and all that, is a nearly identical story to an Akkadian legend from 2300 BCE. Some of the laws that we find in Exodus are basically verbatim from the famous Code of Hammurabi from around 1800 BCE. Some of the rituals we find in Leviticus, and this is where you all have to nod and be like, I know just what you're talking about. I read Leviticus all the time. Rituals in Leviticus are strikingly similar to ones we know elsewhere from the region from the 14th century BCE. There is a section of the book of Proverbs, it's like 3 chapters of Proverbs, that are, as far as you can see, really lifted word for word from an Egyptian text from the 13th century BCE.
Did I not tell you? Did I not tell you? Did I not tell you? Oh my geez. Yo, damn, bro. Ah, man. All right. I'll save it for later.
The Hebrew Bible is very old to us, but let's not get carried away. In my opinion, the oldest text in the Hebrew Bible is the poem that we find in Judges 5, sometimes known as the Song of Deborah. Y'all look at it in your own time. Or, flip to it if you like. This is a song of military victory. And most notably for our purposes, it's a song about how the various Israelite tribes coordinated with each other to fight off their common Canaanite foe. And what makes this poem, to my mind, seem quite old is not just its language, though it does have what feels like an older register of Hebrew. You have to remember, every language changes over time. The English we speak today and the English of 1,000 years ago are so different as to be, I can't read that stuff. Chaucer's pretty tough, right? So Hebrew's the same. You can tell if you've read enough of it, you can tell when you're reading older Hebrew and later Hebrew. So the Hebrew is a little bit older, but what makes the poem really seem old is that its listing of the Israelite tribes who got together to fight their Canaanite enemy is, to say the least, unusual. We, perhaps, are all used to the standard 12 tribes of Israel. or at least you've got in your heads the notion of 12 tribes of Israel. Right? It's over and over again in the biblical narrative. You might have learned it in Sunday school. So the list of tribes invoked in this old poem in Judges 5 includes familiar ones like Ephraim and Benjamin and Zebulun and Issachar and Reuben and Dan and Asher and Naphtali. Great. But also, perhaps less expected, the tribe of Machir and Gilead and Meroz. The tribe of Judah makes no appearance, or Simeon or Manasseh or Levi or Gad. So you got this weird list of tribes participating in this battle. And what this suggests is that this song, this poem, comes from a period of Israel's history before that 12-tribe system that we're familiar with came to be solidified.
Are you dumb?
Yeah. Uh-huh. So there's 12 tribes, Fugazi, for the Hebrews. Understand where this comes from. Where my book at? Where my book at? You wanna know where this ideology comes from? You wanna know? Huh? You wanna know? If you really wanna know the truth about this Hebrew Israelite, the origin and where it comes from and how it became in the minds and in the households of black people, I advise you to get this book. Yeah, this book right here. Let us continue.
Now, those of you familiar with the story of the Bible may be thinking, hold on, the 12 tribes go back to Jacob's sons in Genesis, all the way back at the beginning. And to that I will tell you that there is a pretty significant gap between the history of Israel and the story of Israel's past that the Bible tells us. I don't want to open too big a can of worms, but I will. All I'm doing today is opening lots of cans of worms and then letting them loose among you. I will let you. The secret I will let you in on is there was no idea of this 12 tribe like that. That 12 tribe idea doesn't exist in history until the reign of King David. But that is a different lecture, I'm afraid. I have to keep you wanting more.
Are you dumb?
So this old poem, Judges 5, this old tribal military victory poem, it's not obviously just floating in space in the text. It's been taken up and embedded in a story, the story of the prophet and judge Deborah. That story is itself part of a collection of stories about Israel's early leaders, these judges. And that collection of stories about judges is in turn part of a longer narrative about Israel's transition from individual tribes to a nation with a king. And that story is finally one of the textual sources for an overarching history of the period from the death of Moses through the Babylonian exile. And here's the dilemma that I face. How do I talk about the creation of the Hebrew Bible when even a single chapter is just so complicated? Any ideas? I didn't have one. Okay. Let me focus for a second on the basic literary process that I've just described, which is to say the taking up and reusing of earlier pieces of literature. All of our oldest Israelite literature is found in this way as reused texts. So the oldest bits we have are all like that poem, right? And they're mostly all poetry. Judges 5, Exodus 15, sometimes known as the Song of the Sea, Genesis 49, Deuteronomy 33. These are these poems that are we find in the text.
Did he just say that these things are poems? Genesis 49? When Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, was then told that he was going to give blessings unto his children. These are poems? I don't think you guys are listening, but let's carry on.
They're older not because poetry is like somehow older as a genre than prose, but because biblical poetry presents itself as having been spoken by someone at some time, and it thus lends itself to being put into the mouths of characters in stories. It's not so different from a modern novelist having one of their characters, sing "Rockabye Baby" to a child.
So basically what he's trying to let you guys understand is, because it's a poem, it can be recited and also received as it being one thing but meaning another thing, or just being told to believe into whatever the poem is. For example, everybody says that Hebrew comes from Eber. Eber never said that he was a Hebrew, but because of the story that they tell you, it's gonna be believable. Abram never called himself a Hebrew, but because of what's being said when he went to the Egyptians and they would say, ain't you a Hebrew? And Abram, the Hebrew. This is commentary speaking. This is not Abram saying, I'm a Hebrew. You can't find no recollection, in any biblical text. I challenge anybody, $1,000 cash. If you can tell me where Abram called himself a Hebrew, where Jesus called himself a Hebrew, where Joseph, Jacob, the list goes on, where anybody referred to themselves as a Hebrew. You wouldn't even find David calling himself a Jew. I'm just saying, but let us continue.
Right? The lullaby existed before the novel, right? But it's not like lullabies as a genre are older than prose. In any case, what we're really talking about here is how one text takes up another one, building on and around it in the creation of something new. And it's not just old poetry that this happens to. There's pretty good reason to think that this whole cycle of tales about Israel's judges, right? Deborah, but Samson and others in there, that we find now in chapters 3 through 17 of the book of Judges, that this probably once existed as an independent collection, right? There's like a cycle of stories about the judges that once had its own individual existence, but now we have it as part of a larger book. And that book is itself part of an even longer, broader history of Israel. So continuing to talk about this region of the Bible, the books of Joshua through Kings. So you get through the Pentateuch, and Moses dies, and you get Joshua, and then Judges, and then Samuel, and then Kings. These books are understood by scholars to be one big literary block, a carefully constructed history of Israel's journey from the conquest of Canaan all the way through the fall of Jerusalem and the exile in Babylon. But this history is constructed out of bits and pieces of pre-existing literary materials. Right? This is not like a modern-day historian sitting down and writing. This is like a student plagiarizing, right? Like finding a bunch of books that tell that story and then being like, well, I'll take this chapter from this one, I'll take this chapter from this one, etc. The historian responsible for these books was essentially a collector, an editor. He took various narratives that covered the time period he was interested in, and he brought them together. Sometimes they contradict each other or create narrative inconsistencies, but he doesn't seem to have cared. The historian seems not to have worried. He tossed in stuff from all kinds of sources, royal archives, or older collections of poems. In fact, he sometimes cites them. He says, and here's a thing that I found in this book. And he made it all into a semi-coherent whole by adding his own ideological editorializing statements at key moments throughout the history. So, as an example, we read in the book of Samuel all about this David guy you might have heard of, who, as far as the story goes, if you have really read your book of Samuel, was a traitor and a philanderer and a murderer many times over, an extortionist, basically an all-around thug. Again, that's probably a different talk for a different time. But that's the story of David that was told by one of the historian's sources. And he found this story of David that told all that stuff, and he included it in this sort of epic. And it basically, that story of David that he picks up continues uninterrupted from start to finish. But right near the end of it, in the very first chapter of the book of Kings, and the very last chapter of David's life, suddenly, this guy, David, who has really never shown any interest in anything other than his own power, ends up saying the following words. to Solomon, his son. This is a guy who's murdered everyone, right? Like he's just a terrible dude. And he says to his son on his deathbed, "Keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, so that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn." That is the first, last, and only time in the entire multi-book story of David that he ever mentions the law of Moses or any of the other nice things that he just said there. That's not David of the story we've read about David. It's not the original narrative about him. This is the editor, the historian, tying the David story, which he plucked from another source, into his overarching theme, that Israel's history has been determined and judged by its adherence, or not, to the law of Moses. This is the argument the historian is trying to make, because he's writing during the Babylonian exile in the 6th century. He's trying to make sense of how Israel ended up in this terrible position. How do I know that's when he was writing? Because his history ends like on a Tuesday in the middle of the exile. And I'm pretty sure if he had known that the exile was going to come to an end and Israel would return from it, he probably would have said so. But if the history is from the 6th century, right, that is the broad sweep of Joshua through Kings, this editorial venture, is from the 6th century, and Judges 5, that earliest bit, is from the 11th century, that's still 500 years of textual growth and development to get us from the beginning to the end of just that little piece of the Bible. Perhaps a more famous example of textual reuse is the formation of the Pentateuch. And maybe I should have started there because, that is the beginning after all, and as we all know, the beginning is a very good place to start. But I did get distracted by the whole Judges 5 oldest text thing, and so anyway, here we are. So just to get it out of the way, for whatever it's worth, despite what tradition has taught, the Pentateuch was not written by Moses. Readers have been aware of that Moses didn't write the Pentateuch since the medieval period, and scholarship had basically given up on the idea by the 17th century. There are lots of reasons for thinking Moses didn't write it, not least that the text narrates Moses' death, which is a tough trick to pull off. And there are references to historical events that took place long before the time, or long after the time of Moses. I will admit my favorite reason for not attributing the Pentateuch to Moses is that it includes the following sentence, which would be truly hilarious had Moses been the one to write it. "Now Moses was the most humble man on earth." Anyway, not going to worry about Moses having written the Pentateuch. What I will say is that the Pentateuch is not so unlike the history from Joshua through Kings that we just talked about. It's a mushing together of previously independent texts to tell a continuous story. In this case, the story from the creation of the world through the death of Moses. Unlike in the books that follow, however, the editor of the Pentateuch, whoever it was who put this all together, didn't feel the need to imprint his own literary creation with his own editorializing comments. So like that line I quoted from that is put into David's mouth, there's nothing like that in the Pentateuch. There is no overarching ideology to be found in it. It is rather merely the story of Israel's early history as told by multiple divergent, contradictory sources which have been combined into a running narrative. The example, I give of this is if you were to ask somebody from Watch Hill and somebody from Alabama to give you a history of the Civil War, you get two pretty different stories. Right? They'd agree on a bunch of the stuff. But the emphases would be different, and the who's right and who's wrong. Lots of stuff would be different. And now imagine that you had each of those two histories, and you were trying to write your own history, somebody many years from now, and they found the Watch Hill version and the Alabama version, and said, "I don't know, okay," and put them both together. That's how you end up with, for instance, two creation stories in Genesis 1 and 2. They cannot possibly go together. This is how you end up with a flood story in a few chapters later in Genesis, right? Our story of Noah and the flood, a story that is so riddled with internal inconsistencies that despite the song, the animals, they came on by twosies, right, that song, despite the song, no one could actually tell a biblically accurate story of the flood. When you want to on your own time, go ahead and open to Genesis 6 and read chapters 6 through 9, and then you come back to me and you try and tell me the story, and good luck to you. This is how we end up with things like Moses getting water from a rock in the middle of the wilderness twice, in 2 different places, at 2 different times. This is how we get law codes in the Pentateuch that blatantly contradict each other, over and over again. I could go on, like I said, I could do 10 lectures on this and not be close to done. My point is, the Pentateuch, it turns out, is a combination of 4 once independent sources that have been interwoven into a new unity that none of those sources themselves could possibly have imagined. I happen to think that trying to disentangle those sources from each other is just about as much fun as solving any mystery, which is why this is what I do professionally. But we don't have time for that here. That is now a 3rd different lecture that I'm not giving for those who are keeping score. Okay, here's where it gets complicated. More complicated. I can tell you basically when the Pentateuch was put together, right? I mean, I told you before, Joshua through Kings was put together in the exile, and I know that because that's when the story ends. But I can tell you when the Pentateuch was put together, and the answer is actually sometime in the 5th or 4th century BCE. How do I know that? Because the only other texts in the Bible that seem to have any idea that there was such a thing as a Pentateuch are from that time. And here's my favorite example. I said a minute ago that the Pentateuch is full of contradictory laws. So one of those contradictions comes in terms of how it is that you are to prepare the lamb that is sacrificed on Passover. In Deuteronomy, we are told you are to boil the meat. And in Exodus, we are told explicitly you may not boil it or eat it raw. You must roast it in fire. What are you going to do? No one cares about that until we get to the book of Chronicles, around 400 BC. I told you Chronicles. I knew Chronicles was going to come back. Chronicles comes to tell the story of one of its great heroes, the King Josiah. And Josiah, Chronicles tells us, offered the Passover sacrifice. How did he do it? One might ask. And it tells us, Josiah boiled the lamb in fire, according to the law. Right? So you can see right around the time that we suddenly get texts that not only refer to the Pentateuch as a piece of literature, they're also clearly trying to figure out what to do with this weird text with all of its contradictions. So we can see when the Pentateuch emerges onto the scene for other biblical writers. Okay, so roughly the 5th or 4th century BCE. That's fine for the Pentateuch, like the whole thing. What about the sources, the pieces that went into making it? Here's where it gets hairy. I can tell you that they were all obviously completed by the time the Pentateuch was put together. But when were they started? I could venture some guesses. One maybe in the 9th century, maybe one in the 8th century, maybe one in the 7th century. I'm not just making, I actually think that's when I wasn't just counting down. But we would be mistaken if we thought about these literary works as the products of like a single person sitting down and writing a thing from start to finish and sending it off to the publisher and then seeing it on Amazon. Right? That's not how things worked back then. Every one of these sources of the Pentateuch, these 4 previously independent texts, has its own complicated literary history. We can see layers of editing within them, sometimes relatively minor expansions, a verse or a word here and there, sometimes nearly full-scale revision, including the addition of multiple chapters. These works, like most biblical books, were the products of schools, not of individuals. Schools that were active over many generations and even many centuries. So this process, that is the revision of existing literature, this is a process we see across the entire Hebrew Bible. And it's actually it's central to understanding what it is that we're reading in our biblical text. We tend now, for our own reasons, to think of the Bible as like a timeless text, right? But we can't forget that it was written and revised in specific historical and cultural circumstances and contexts. What we're looking at in the Bible isn't just an attempt to explain the world, right, or to understand Israel's relationship with its God. What we're looking at is actually the constant drive to make sense of everything that's happening in the world as the world changes around Israel. This is probably nowhere clearer than in the prophets, and particularly in the book of Isaiah. The prophet Isaiah is introduced for us at the beginning of the book as having operated in Judah, that is the southern part of Israel, in the 8th century BCE. And indeed, the first half of the book of Isaiah, roughly, is clearly speaking from and about that time and place. There are references to historical events and persons that make sense only then and there. All fine and good. But then we hit chapter 40, which is you may actually know relatively well. It's the one that begins, a voice cries out in the wilderness, prepare ye a highway in the desert. We get to chapter 40, and suddenly we are in a completely different world. The Isaiah who had been prophesying doom for Israel on account of its many violations of social justice is gone, replaced by an Isaiah who is now declaring wonderful things. Highways in the desert. Most prominently, the highway in the desert, a return for Israel from the Babylonian exile, which is, again, a tough trick for the 8th century Isaiah to have pulled off. This second Isaiah, and that's what we call him in scholarship, second Isaiah, builds on the language and themes of first Isaiah, but dramatically recontextualizes them. Now the historical references are naturally to the 6th century. Second Isaiah explicitly mentions the Persian king Cyrus, for example. So what you're seeing is a later author for whom the original Isaiah's prophecies were important, maybe even authoritative, but for whom they were also sorely out of date. What good is the prediction of Israel's doom when that doom has already arrived? How can the words of first Isaiah from the 8th century speak to a community that's now in exile in Babylon? Those words are taken up and then built on, expanded, made to speak in a different way. And what happens when this community in exile actually returns back to Israel, to its homeland, and suddenly faces an entirely new set of social problems? Now neither first Isaiah nor second Isaiah will suffice. And thus, the last 12 chapters of the book of Isaiah, we get a third perspective, still building on the first two, but speaking now in light of its own contemporary issues. The book of Isaiah is the record of a community trying to make sense of itself, adjusting its theology to conform to the ever-changing waves of history on which Israel was born. Now, Isaiah is maybe the most dramatic example of this, but it's visible in other prophets as well. As a process, revision of texts is a reminder that the Hebrew Bible is not just a library, but a living library in which the texts that make it up are treasured, yes, but are also in need of regular refreshing so they can continue to speak to a new world. And we see this not just within, but across books. Cliffhanger. Jeremiah famously predicts that Israel will be exiled to Babylon for 70 years. Now, Jeremiah was written right at the beginning of the exile, so 70 years is what we in the industry call a wild guess. But actually, it wasn't too far off. It was actually closer to 50 years. In any case, some 400 years later, the book of Daniel took up Jeremiah's prophecy. It cites it explicitly. The prophet Jeremiah says 70 years of exile, but then explicitly reinterprets it When Jeremiah said 70 years, what he meant was 70 weeks of years. That is 490 years, which is to say, right around when Daniel was written. Why would someone do such a thing? Well, because for Daniel, Jeremiah's prophecy hadn't actually come true, at least not entirely. Israel, in the time the book of Daniel, which is to say the 2nd century BCE, Daniel's the latest book in the Bible probably, the Hebrew Bible, in the 2nd century BC, Israel was being pretty badly oppressed by a foreign empire. It wasn't Babylon, as it had been in the time of Jeremiah, but again, that's just a matter of reinterpretation. I'll say Babylon, but you'll know I'm really talking about Rome. In other words, what good is a prophecy about Babylon to someone who's living centuries after Babylon has ceased to exist? It has to be about something else. Something contemporary to its audience. And honestly, as an interpretive practice, that ought to feel relatively familiar. After all, what good is a prophecy about the imminent birth and reign of an Israelite king from the 8th century BCE to someone living, 700 years later? That's how a child has been born for us in Isaiah 9 becomes understood not to be about the Israelite king Hezekiah, as it originally was, but about a messianic figure from Nazareth. Again, the literature of the Hebrew Bible was written for its own time and place, but readers for whom that literature became authoritative or even sacred have always looked to make it about their own time and place. And some of those readers were also biblical authors, like Daniel, or 2nd Isaiah, or all the people in the New Testament.
Now, I hope you guys are paying attention. I'm trying to minimize my pop-ups, but I want you guys to pay attention. These people, we'll save it till the end. We'll save it till the end.
Perhaps the most striking example of a text that combines both reuse and revision is Chronicles. Right? All your eyes just glazed over. Right? Chronicles is not the most compelling reading, but it is a pretty revealing piece of literature. For the most part, the book of Chronicles retells the history that we find in Samuel and Kings. And when I say retells, I really mean like retells. It's very often word for word, verbatim repetition of the earlier books. You can see where it just copied line by line. But again, there's a time gap, right? Samuel and Kings from the 7th century, Chronicles from the 4th. And that time gap covers a pretty major change in Israel's fortunes and even in its identity. Here's an example of what I mean. I'm going to go back to my favorite friend, David. The story of David in the book of Samuel is, as I mentioned, pretty full of some not so nice stuff. Lots of people dying around him, lots of conflict, a whole mess surrounding who would succeed him on the throne, and a very brief mention of the idea that David wanted to build the temple in Jerusalem, but God said, no, I'm leaving that for your son. That's the story we get in Samuel about David. Fast forward some hundreds of years to Chronicles, and now the text is emerging from a period of Israel's history when David had become not known as just the first great king, but really as a symbol of the nation, a legend. And Chronicles was written at a time when there was no longer a king in Israel. All of the power instead was located in the temple in Jerusalem and with the priests who served there. So when Chronicles, in that context, comes to retell the David story, what we get is a king who encounters no conflict of any kind whatsoever. There is no antagonism with Saul or his son Absalom. There are no murders of political opponents. There's no funny business with who's going to succeed him. David, in Chronicles, has the easy reign of a legend. And what takes...
Are you dumb?
When I say these things, you know, you guys say that I be wildin'. When I tell you these things, man, listen. Let us continue.
Actually, the vast majority of Chronicles' description of David's reign is, amazingly, his preparations for the building of the temple. Now, Chronicle knows David didn't build the temple. Everyone knew it was Solomon's temple. But Chronicles spends chapter upon chapter telling us how David designed the architecture, implemented the sacrifices, appointed the priests and the singers. Right? Goes on and on and on. And this is how, for this version of his story, David becomes the patron saint of the Jerusalem temple. Because the priests who are writing his story now, some 100 years later, have made themselves part of his legendary legacy.
Are you dumb?
Part of what I'm trying to get at in these last couple of examples is the way that the Hebrew Bible is a rolling corpus, one that builds on and reinterprets itself, both within individual books like Isaiah or across books, as with Chronicles. There are also places where we can see this process of accretion in perhaps more straightforward ways. The book of Psalms is obviously a collection. Right? Each individual psalm is its own independent composition, and we still treat them that way. But Psalms provides us with ample evidence for its internal growth. I suppose I ought to say, for the record, as I did earlier with Moses and the Pentateuch, that despite what tradition holds, David did not write the Psalms. And while I'm here, Solomon didn't write Proverbs or Ecclesiastes. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can ruin. Now I'll stop there.
Did you guys just hear that? Did you guys just hear that? David did not write the book of Psalms. So when we are rehearsing these verses and we justify it by saying this is what David was saying, yeah. Everybody should get themselves the book titled How to Make a Negro a Christian. Yeah. Let us continue.
Okay, back to Psalms. There are 5 separate little books within the book of Psalms, marked by what look like, at the end of each one of them, benedictions, like, blessed be Lord forever, amen and amen, which comes at the end of Psalm 89, for example. There are lots of smaller units in Psalms, groups of Psalms that share features, like there's this series called the Song of Ascents, or the Songs of Asaph, or the series that starts Hallelujah, right? They're all clumped together. These were probably once distinct small collections, brought together over time into the big sort of bucket of Israelite poetry that the book of Psalms is. But this corpus wasn't ever really complete. Our Bibles, the ones in front of you in the pews, have 150 Psalms, because that's how many are in our 11th century manuscript. The Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible has 151. And some of its Psalms are in different order or combined differently. The Dead Sea Scrolls seem to have another 5 or so that aren't in either the Greek or our modern Bibles. In short, as an anthology of Israelite poetry, the book of Psalms was an open one. The same was probably true of Proverbs, which has its own indications of being a once independent collection of sayings, or there being multiple of those within it that have been aggregated together, basically, united by common genre. Right? If you come up with a collection of Proverbs, where else is it going to go? To tie it all back, the open nature of Psalms as a book, that is to say, its continual revision over time, is in fact a feature of virtually every biblical text. I may be overstating, but not by a lot, when I say that there is probably not a single book or corpus of the Hebrew Bible that didn't undergo editing, revising, updating, or expanding between the time that it was written and when it reached the form that we have it in today.
Written, as when it was written, you see this? Pay attention to what he's telling you. Pay attention to what he's telling you, guys. I've been trying to tell you this for a very long time. I know you guys are saying that I be bugging. I gotta bring you these historians. I gotta bring you these Europeans. Now, let me show my face quick fast. Matter of fact, I don't even want to mess it up. I just want to let me say this. The reason why we as colored people have to rely on these sources as far as when it's coming from other nationalities is because they are actually the ones that's really doing the works. The last person that's of our skin color that was out there and trying to do the works was Dr. Ben, who wrote numerous books. And you guys discredit him because he didn't carry the complexion of a European. But this man been all over, all through Africa. This man even also went to Israel. And everything that he's telling you, that he's been saying, I got his book somewhere. I gotta finish that one too. He tells us about these type of informations and how these things was plagiarized and counterfeit, and you know, the list goes on. But I don't want to put the horse before the cart. I'm just letting you guys know. I want you guys paying attention. This is for your redemption, people. This is for your redemption. Okay? Let us continue.
The one exception might be the book of Obadiah. But it's only a chapter long, and no one reads it. And I kind of can't believe I even brought it up. Other than that, we have no pure biblical texts. Everything we read has undergone change. And I want to suggest that this process of change should be more interesting to us as contemporary readers than is the question of original authorship. Who wrote the biblical texts and when? It's not that this is not interesting, because surely it is. It is rather that the answer is almost random. We have only the texts that have survived. There were surely many times over more texts that have not survived. But these texts in our Bible have survived not because they were written, but because they were read. Because they were read and interpreted and updated and made relevant for the next generations. I'll give you a quick counterexample, actually. Some of you may be familiar with the book of Ben Sira, or Ecclesiasticus, which is part of the Catholic canon and is sometimes included in the Apocrypha of the biblical canon, Protestant canon. Now, Ben Sira is a book that was widely read by early Christians, which is why it is often found in Christian Bibles. But even though Ben Sira is a book that was written by a Jew in Hebrew at the same time, basically, as the book of Daniel, that is still squarely within the biblical period, Ben Sira was not read by early Jews. So it's not in the Jewish Hebrew Bible. It is not cited by the rabbis of the first millennium CE. It forms no part of modern Jewish heritage. It was out there, but if it weren't for Christians reading it, we wouldn't have it anymore. All that to say, what makes a text biblical isn't its having been written, but its having been read. This is, perhaps, as good a place as any to talk about how we ended up with this particular Bible, taking what I've just said as a basic principle. What we should realize is that this Bible wasn't designed. Despite what you sometimes may hear, there was no council to determine which books were in the Hebrew Bible and which books were out. The Hebrew Bible is a library, and like every library, what's in it is determined by what people were actually reading. It's not a top-down collection. It's a bottom-up one. It's a grassroots collection. These books are what makes up the Hebrew Bible because these are the books that were read by, in this case, the classical Jewish rabbis of the first millennium CE. That's the reading community that determined which books were in and which, like Ben Sira, were not. But even they weren't determining which were in and out by voting or anything. Right? They were just the books that they used, that their inherited reading community found to be authoritative, or maybe even just useful. And we know this in part because, again with apologies to the next speaker in the series, the Dead Sea Scrolls provide us with evidence of a different library for a different reading community. Our Bible is what it is not because it's better or more authentic, but because we happen to be the cultural descendants of this group of Jews and not that one. Had the vicissitudes of history been different and the Dead Sea communities survived rather than the rabbis, we'd be reading a different Bible, and we'd still think of it as the Bible. The Bible is full of evidence of its own self-reading, as I've tried to describe, I realize, all too briefly. Texts that have been revised, texts that have been reused, texts interpreted and reinterpreted. The earliest readers of the Bible were within the Bible itself. And they have left us, in our Bibles, a legacy of what it means to read a biblical text. All too often, I see people arguing that some community's interpretation of the text is wrong because it's not accurate to what the original author meant. Setting aside the difficulty of accessing an author's intent across a 3,000-year time gap, that entire approach seems to me to run counter to what the Bible actually says about itself. It is precisely because these texts were created in and for specific historical circumstances that they've always needed to be newly interpreted as time and circumstance has changed. The Hebrew Bible is an object lesson in the practice of interpreting older texts in light of new historical and cultural developments. When we do that today, we're not violating some biblical truth. We are, in fact, acting biblically. The Bible isn't a text that we need to go back to. It's a text that we take with us, as indeed the Bible's own authors did for nearly 1,000 years. The creation of the Hebrew Bible is indistinguishable from the use, the reading, and interpretation of the Hebrew Bible. And we create it anew every time we read it.
You also forgot to mention the control part. See, it's not for you to comprehend, it's for you to take along with you. To take along with you, to receive, and then to also give. And again, we're giving our perception and what we believe what the author is saying. Meaning, I can say, for example, Jacob was fighting with the angel, man. It's proven. And then I can come out and say, well, if he was fighting with the angel, and that's the angel of God, then why would the angel then ask him what is his name? If he was already to be the chosen. You see, as little things like that, that when you start asking those type of questions, you then have to look at what you are reading from a different point of view. You see, a lot of you guys are reading the Biblos according to what you was told and how to read it. And that's the problem. We have to start reading it for what it is there for. And we gotta hold everything that's being said accountable. So if you tell me thou shalt not kill, but then if I go into another chapter and it's showing you killing, then how justified or how reasonable should thou shalt not kill be? How serious can that be if you're telling us to do something but you're doing the total opposite? I want you guys to think about that. Just think about it. We're going to continue.
I am conscious of the many questions I have left open over the course of this talk. I have also learned from long experience that as much fun as it is for you to sit there and listen to me, it's even more fun for you to get to ask questions. And honestly, it's more fun for me to get to answer them. So thank you, and have at it.
There you go, people. I brought to you a scholar, a well-known scholar, and he's basically letting you know who and what this so-called Hebrew Bible that everybody is holding dear to is really about. Now, again, why am I going to this individual? Because this individual is actually doing the works. We don't have black people that's on the grounds, that's in those areas, that's documenting it, that's showing, et cetera, et cetera. Everything that we're doing, I'm speaking about black people, is ideologies given unto us by somebody else. Everything. And we try to interpretate it to fit our narrative. But here's a historian, here's a scholar who's telling you everything that you're reading, yeah. And as for us, as being the children of the creators, you gotta hold things into consideration. You gotta ask yourself questions like, then why was the Bible, the Biblos, given unto the slaves? Why was the main objective was to convert us into Christianity, into Judaism, into Islam, and at this moment right now, converting us into Judaism. And when I speak to the people of the land don't have no recollections of the things that's being told to us by the Biblos that us here in America, is subjecting ourselves to. People have no recollection of that. No story of David, no kingdom. He just showed you the Chronicles and the book of Samuels. How one is saying he's doing this and the other one is the total opposite. But yet we're teaching this to the people and we're telling the people that this is for real. It's not for real. It is not for real. The real redemption, the real correction, the real protection is amongst us. It's amongst us. We must never forget. You see, like how the Jewish people never forget about the Holocaust and those who participated in it, we must never forget the Holocaust that happened unto us and the people that did the Holocaust. There's no gray area when it comes to that. There's no, everything is, put it in God's hands. This is the ideology that was taught to you by them. The objective was to prevent you from ever connecting to your African culture. The Leopold's letter says that. The book, the Charles Jones, How to Make a Negro into a Christian, says that. And the reason why I have to stand on this, because I see what the Biblos is doing to the minds of my people. I'm seeing how the Biblos is really getting brothers and sisters in a state of delusion and confusion. And not want to solve the problem, but yet waiting on a solution. We're waiting on a story that was told unto us by the handlers. Oh, you better obey your master because you don't want to go to hell. Judgment is on the earth. You don't want to burn in eternal fire. I'm gonna give you the breakdown about hell too. I got a lot of things that I gotta bring forth to you guys. But I just gotta start showing you guys videos from professionals, from professors with degrees. You gotta hear it from the horse's mouth because when I say it, you guys say that I be wildin'. And I know the things that I say goes against what you see, what you believe, and also what you teach. I know. But is your position and what you're teaching more important than the true redemption of the people? I'm talking for a people that was kidnapped, raped, slaughtered, butchered, violated all across the board. Is us regurgitating this ideology given unto us by the enemy, is that more important than the true salvation? That's my son, by the way. Is that more important? Because if that is more important, then you doing the wrong job. If you want us to subject ourselves into another ideology given unto us by the enemy, you're doing the wrong job. And before you present such information, you got to make sure you get the basics covered first. What is the basics? The basics is, okay, yes, granted, let's just say the story took place in Africa. We're not going to argue that. But if you telling me about such characters, why nobody has no, you know what I'm saying? Understanding of where these people was buried. Where's the evidence for that? No burial grounds? Abram, Isaac, Jacob, Levi, Simeon, the whole shebang? No burial grounds, no body parts, no bones, no nothing, no casket. David, Solomon, Paul, Peter, you know what I'm saying? Like, where is these people's bodies, their burials, man? Why aren't we seeing these things? And if I'm unable to see this, and I'm going down and I'm doing my studies and I'm listening carefully. That's why I play this video, so you guys can listen carefully. Pay attention to what he's saying. And when I'm listening carefully and I'm hearing things like, oh yeah, the word Solomon, Salomon, is 3 arms. It means turn on in 3 different languages. Compiled together, create Solomon. Then if I see that, then hold on. And if that's what's being said, then what's going on? And if these individuals is as prestige as they say that they are, as prestige as they say that they are, then there should be some level of evidence dating back to them. And man, I don't want to hear no mystical story of Jesus came from the seed of David. Where's David? How did the David fall? How did everybody lose their positions? What happened? What happened to the children? What happened? Where's the in-between stories? It goes from that to the prophecies, we in captivity, and then we in the New Testament. Where's the stories of how did we so-called fall from the reins of power completely? I need piece by piece. You guys give me the book of Joshua when you want to give me Genesis. I need piece by piece for everything else. And if I can't receive piece by piece for everything else, then by default, what's being said to me has to be disqualified. Because we can't, and I said we, I'm talking about black and brown people, can't afford to be led astray anymore. We can't afford it. You see what's going on in this world? It's about to be civil war here in America. It's about to be civil war out in Africa. It's going to be a full-fledged worldwide attack upon black people worldwide. There's no running from this. And those that remain, your mind has to change. Those that remain, your mind's going to have to change. Because all that subtlety that came along with these religions, sit still and kumbaya and hallelujah, something is going to come from the sky and save you, and the creators, it doesn't work that way. The creators gotta come and save somebody. They gotta come and save somebody. How they're coming to save is by you gotta be worthy of that save. That saving that they're telling us, that they've been feeding us through slavery, that's not the savings. There's no judgment that's coming on this earth to redeem us and bring the kingdom, establish the kingdom on this earth. These people use that to allow you to accept being in captivity. That's the reason why these things was put together. This is facts. I got the books. And I'm sure you got anybody that's doing the studies, in-depth studies, will fall, this thing will fall in your lap. But because of the indoctrination of the organizations, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Islam, Judaism, Hebrewism, and even with the Bantuism to a degree, we base our ideologies off the information given unto us by them. And we're forcing ourselves in our minds to believe that this is about black people, and this is a black man's book, and this is that's not true, bro. That's not true. And we gotta step away from this ideology because it's destroying us. That's not true. The true redemption and the true understanding is first understanding self, then understanding each other, then putting it together and putting our focus back where it needs to be focused on. Our minds need to be focused on Africa. Africa is home, people. But we're not gonna go into the land, and I repeat, we're not going into the land with any religious ideology. You come in there trying to be a Christian, you're gonna be removed. You coming in there trying to be an Islam, you're gonna be removed. You coming in there telling people that you Hebrew Israelites, you're gonna be removed. You're going to be removed. I'm just saying, guys. I'm just saying. How many of us is really ready to break out of this matrix? How many of us is spiritually ready to break out of this matrix? Some of you guys aren't. Some of you guys want that sit still. Y'all want that feel good. You want that hopeful story. You hope something is going to change. You hope somebody's going to redeem you. You hope that we're going to get a land back. You hope that we're going to get, just hope. The last time I checked, everything that was achieved in this world was achieved off actions, not hope. Noah didn't hope. He worked by himself and created an ark. And there's stories right now, and I'm not gonna dive into it, but there's stories right now that tells you even the Noah's Ark story wasn't true. That ark comes from Egypt, and the man just told you that. A lot of the writings is coming from Egypt. Egypt was the known civilization on man. And I find it ironic that these people is always in Egypt, but yet we're being told not to follow the ways of Egypt. Now, I'm not into the Kemet stuff and all that, but I'm not gonna disregard the blackness that happened over there. And I'm not gonna put European literature because we don't have the actual facts. These are just insertions and opinions. These are not facts that what we're reading to be 100% true. Because there's contradictions in itself. The word said, if you keep my commandments, you shall live. If you keep my commandments, you should be the head and not the tail. Why are we still the tail? Because they told you that you gotta wait for the judgment. When the judgment comes and the books is open and then the evil shall be judged, then there should be a new Jerusalem. These people are building the new Jerusalem right now. And guess where they're building it up at? They're gonna build it right in Africa. They're gonna build it right in Africa. They never wanted to be in the Middle East. Never. But they needed the slaves to believe that they was from there. Like, oh yeah, that's where you from. Meanwhile, your whole entire turf is up for sale. And they got the money and the resource to buy it. And they got the military presence to take it if they really want to. But what's preventing it is that the black people is no longer afraid. That the black people is connecting back to their ancestral roots and connecting back to their ancestors. The creators is putting and I don't want to say the spirit of courage because ain't no spirit dwelling in us, but putting the missing pieces back onto our soul is being put back. And they feel that. This is why let's remove a mass majority of them, and then let's infuse ourselves with the minority of them. You understand? It's a full-fledged attack, people. It's a full-fledged attack. And as long as you stay asleep and behind the bush, your life will forever be took because you too goddamn shook. And I'm always open for conversation. But what I'm never going to do moving forward, I'm never gonna argue based on observations that you proclaim to be true when everything that we was told has been a lie. No truth is gonna set you free. No truth. Because there's no truth on this earth. We're not even truthful to ourselves. Come on now, talk to me nice. Only the facts is gonna set us free. And on that note, I hope you guys really, grasp this information. And again, let me just give a disclaimer because you're gonna have individuals saying that I'm trying to disrupt their minds. I'm not trying to take you away from whatever you want to believe because you're going to do whatever you want to do. I'm just trying to just set the stage and set the record straight and let you understand what you are participating in, what you are indulging yourself into, and that the mass majority of things that we was told has been lies. And if you really want to seek redemption, and if you really want to take back your freedom, your identity, it's not waiting for something to come do it for you. We got to start doing it for ourselves. We got to start doing it for ourselves. Put all this religious perspective, ideologies aside. Put all of this aside. Let's just focus on the facts. The facts is, you black, I'm black. The facts is you were sent here against your will. The facts is that your family was conquered. The facts is religion was forced down your throat. The facts is the facts is that there's a system in place to prevent you from ever elevating. These are the facts. These are the things that we must stand on. So let's correct. Now we see what these facts is. Now let's have a conversation and start coming with solutions. We don't want no insertions, assumptions. We don't want that no more. Because all it's doing is making brothers and sisters big-headed to feel like they know what they're talking about. And if you don't agree with that, then you are of the devil. And this and that. We got to get off that. We got to get off that boat. We got to get off that bus. We got to get off that train. We got to get out that Uber. Like I made a live long before. Take back the wheel from Jesus. Because Jesus has been taking you guys to the morgue, to the nearest clinic, to the funeral home, to the hospitals, to the G buildings. He's been taking you to Disneyland, Wonderland, where you just sitting there in a state of confusion thinking, yeah, I'm happy. We got to get up out of that. Because you see what's going on in this world, people. You don't got to listen to me. Just watch, just look what's going on in the world. These people are coming into the land. Our people is like, now we're not teaching no more of these ideologies no more. France is not, the France teachings and history is not being taught in a lot of African countries right now. And I don't want to say countries, African locations, African colonized areas. People is like, nah, we're not doing that. But the number one thing that we are too afraid to let go of is the religion that they came and they gave us. And we're trying to subscribe and force ourselves to believe that this is about us. When I'm watching these Europeans school every single black person, and the black person, his rebuttal is, oh yeah, you a Gentile, you just not gonna understand, it wasn't written for you. Psalms 147, I know, I was saying this. Until I realized, of course they're gonna know. This is their writings. This is their writings, this is their book, this is their story. When are we gonna go find ours? Let's not mix the two. You can't serve two masters. We don't want black and white. We just want what's black. Just give me what's black. Just give me what's mine. Oh yeah, this is the story. Oh, do you speak Hebrew? How are we gonna justify what we read? We don't even speak Hebrew. We don't speak Greek. We don't speak none of these things. We don't speak vocabulary. We don't speak African, but we know people that do. So if we know people that do, the objective is to learn the language and speak to the people, because that's what matters. That's what's important. I'm hearing stories left to right about kingdoms and this and that. There was many kings. There was kings in Nigeria. There was kings in Nigeria. There was kings in Morocco. There was all these kings. When you look into the maps, you see all these kings. So how come all these kings is not in the Biblos? But you're saying the Biblos is us. It doesn't make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make dollars. And if it ain't about the dollar, I can't follow. Because dollars is what we need for us to live proper. I want you to think about that. So, again, people, it was a pleasure being with you guys. Another Samba down the drain. I see you guys don't have no questions, which is cool. You know what I'm saying? I just want you guys to start, you know what I'm saying? Just start doing your homework. Stop giving these people too much credit, man. Stop. Let these people expose themselves, so when you have that doubt, that feeling that, yo, this don't make sense, or this is not right, but you too afraid because you believe that if you step away, you're gonna go to hell and do this. Just know that these people are the one that fed you this ideology. We don't die, people. We quadruplified. We immortalized. We can't die. We here forever. You understand? So on that note, I hope you guys have a beautiful rest of your day. Again, you know, I lost my mans. I'm gonna get off. I'm gonna go take a rest. I ain't sleep since. Been up since like 3 in the morning actually. Gonna definitely take a rest and prepare myself for tomorrow because I gotta go to the candle lighting and give my condolences. But yeah, if it's your first time, I hope it's not your last time. If it's your second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth time, that means I'm still on your mind. That means we gotta stay on that grind. And that grind is to do what? It's time for us to shine. You understand? Because you better go get yours, because I'm definitely gonna go get mine. And again, remember people, I am him. If I said it once, let me say it again. I am him, Jooms the MBIC. You understand? AKA Mr. What? Keep my foot on you what? On this Christianity, this Islam, this Judaism, this Hebrewism, and this Hinduism. This neck until there's no more, till it's completely eradicated from us. Okay? Are you dumb or are you dumb? Listen to one half of the Creator say it one time for the one time. And remember, people, you must free your mind or you're going to get left behind. It's your brother, man. You understand? One.